A cordial greeting to all. Welcome to this self-knowledge course. Today we will see the second conference, a very interesting topic in which we will talk about the mysteries of death. The objective of this topic is that we can understand what death is, since death is an important part of life. Also, that we know what is the process that the disembodied soul goes through when the physical body dies. What are those things that people experience when they have a near-death experience? We will see if we really only live once, or if we live successive existences. We are also going to study what types of death exist and how death liberates in all cases. And we will see what dies and what does not die at the moment of physical death. Ignorance of death has made most human beings fear it, and do not see in death the goal, or the final objective of everything. If a person truly understands what death is, they will no longer be afraid of it, and will be able to venture into the mysteries of life and death. We are very attached to life, and we are very afraid of death, because we don't know what will happen next. There are many theories, many concepts. Some say that after death there is nothing else. And then they give free rein to their pleasures and desires because you only live once. Others say that after death we go to heaven or hell, and that this will be eternal. Others say that we die and are reborn, that death is just like a change of clothes. But the problem is that since we don't know how to directly verify the veracity of these concepts, we settle for just believing or not believing. We believe what seems most logical to us, or what adapts to what we have been taught. And this remains in our minds as an unproven concept, but of which we believe we are very sure. So, it is important that we start to develop conscious astral projection, to start doing this kind of research directly with the higher parts of our own being. And it is important to point out that everything that we are going to talk about on this subject and throughout the self-knowledge course can be verified by each one of you. Since the information we share is not intended to generate a concept in which you simply believe or doubt, rather, it is intended to motivate you to question yourself and move you to investigate for yourself. And in the next topic, we will talk about astral projection. There we will teach how to achieve it, and we will see how we can corroborate all this information and many other things for ourselves with that practice. Now, let's see this. Once we leave the sacred absolute sun, which is that source or God where we all come from, and arrive at this physical manifestation, we are given 3,000 opportunities on the wheel of samsara to try to achieve self-realization. At each opportunity, we are going to create a soul, going through a process of evolution through the different kingdoms of nature, and upon reaching the human kingdom, we have the right to 108 human physical bodies. In each of those 3,000 cycles, we have the right to 108 human physical bodies. That means that we have the right to return in 324,000 physical human bodies, passing through physical death. All this will happen mechanically if we do not understand the importance of psychological death, which allows us to reach the intimate self-realization of the being in a single existence. The reason to live is to die, and we have no other task than this. You are born to die, and you die to be born. If the germ does not die, the plant doesn't grow. Death is only the end of something and at the same time the beginning of something, since life is tied to death, just as death is tied to life. But the important thing is to understand that death liberates, in all cases. For this reason, it is important to know that there are 3 types of death, which are closely related to each other, and that one could not be studied without studying the other 2. One is the death of the physical body. Another is the second death. And the last one is psychological death. We are going to study each of them in detail. Let us study the process of death of the physical body. This begins with a state of catalepsy that lasts 72 hours, where the physical body is apparently dead. But this state can be suspended at any time, with which the dying person would return to the body during this period. There are many stories of people who have come back from death during that time, and there are many stories of people who were buried alive, and their coffins were later found with marks on the inside or their corpses found with grimace of despair. Unfortunately, today almost no one is aware of the death process, previously known to all the tribes and peoples of the planet. And the dying people are being buried alive, or autopsied before the 72 hours are up. This could be avoided if people knew more about the dying process, and were not so afraid of it. If we went back to the old way, a 72-hour funeral, this could be avoided. After those 72 hours, it can be confirmed that the person died. During these 72 hours, 3 judgments are held, as follows. The first judgment occurs in the first 5 minutes. The disembodied person makes a conscious retrospect of each one of his acts in this existence, carefully observing each event of the lived existence. And upon reaching the very moment of his birth, compares the lived existence with the plan he had brought for it. That is the reason why people who have had near-death experiences say that they have seen their life flash before their eyes like a movie. The objective of this first judgment is to review each act of existence to make us aware of them. Each person before being born brings a plan for that existence. For this reason, it is extremely important that we begin to ask ourselves, to inquire into our own consciousness to find the answer to the question, what is the purpose of my existence? Because it is really very sad to arrive at this physical existence and spend all the time that we have to live, so absorbed in the trivialities of the world, so absorbed in work, in problems, in pleasures and distractions, that we never take time to ask ourselves, what did I really come here for? And let another existence pass without achieving this purpose. This first judgment is made by our own consciousness. The second trial takes place approximately 24 hours after the start of the death process, before the lords of the divine law. And in this judgment 2 things will be considered. The first is the atomic weight of each of our egos or psychological defects. They will weigh our pride, lust, laziness, greed, our envy, our tyranny, our selfishness, our lies, etc. And they will compare it with the weight that these defects had in the previous existence, to see how much they have increased or decreased. It is common, if we do not work on ourselves, that the atomic weight of our defects increases from one existence to another because we spend our time identified, fascinated with this world, and we let all those defects constantly steal our energy, every time we let them manifest themselves through us. The second thing to consider here will be the number of psychological defects. This amount is then compared with what the dying person had at the end of his previous existence, to see if they increased or decreased in this one. And that is the second judgment, in which our psychological defects will be counted and pondered. The third judgment is given at approximately 48 hours. The soul of the disembodied is taken to the court of objective justice. 3 things are judged here. The first is the weight of the good or bad deeds of each one of the eyes or psychological aggregates, that is, the acts of existence. Good deeds are the acts of charity and the conscious acts that we perform. Charity is the times we help someone. When we give them food, shelter, or the times we help someone financially or emotionally. Conscious acts are the times we did something to help someone to awaken consciousness. Bad deeds are all the times that we allow our psychological defects to act instead of our consciousness. All our bad deeds will be taken into consideration in this judgment. We can see this judgment represented in this Egyptian painting known as the Judgment of Osiris, which represents the soul of the disincarnated being taken by Anubis before the court of divine justice, and we see a scale where the heart is weighed on one side representing the intentions, and on the other side is the feather of truth, that represents the good deeds we have done. The second thing that will be judged here will be the number of times that each of these psychological defects manifested in us in the existence. And the third thing will be the measure of the fire in the spinal cord to see if this person worked on suprasex by raising the sexual energy, or Kundalini up the spine or not. At the end of this process, the addition and subtraction of fractions is made, with which several things will be determined. The karma that this soul will endure in its next existence. Also here, the electropsychic design of the new personality will be determined. All this, if the person has the right to a new existence. If he hasn't exhausted his 108 existences as a human yet. After this trial, Anubis, the hierarch of objective justice, orders the angel of death to cut the silver cord of the disembodied and that he be released from his physical body. But before proceeding, the angel of death asks the Divine Mother of the dying person for permission. If authorized, he takes up to 24 hours to cut the silver cord with the death ray. But if the mother doesn't authorize the death ray, because she considers that there are still things that the person must live, experience, or fulfill, or decides to give him another chance to achieve the purpose of his existence, then the person would return to the physical body before those 72 hours. Once the angel of death has acted and cut the silver cord, 3 alternatives are open to the disembodied. The first alternative occurs if the person has not exhausted his 108 existences yet, and still has another opportunity to try his self-realization in that cycle. In that case, his soul will be taken to a region known as limbo, that is found in submerged caverns within the planet Earth, but in the 5th dimension, where he will project all his life, and will continue there with the sleeping consciousness, waiting for his next body. The second alternative occurs if the person has completed his 108 existences, and when measuring the level of fire in his spine, Anubis finds that he has not awakened and raised the sacred fire through his spinal cord. In that case it is judged as dry cane, and the verdict is to be sent to the abyss. Then that soul is taken to be submerged in the infra-dimensions of planet Earth, where he will experience what is known as the second death, which I will explain in a moment. The third alternative occurs if the person worked with the sacred fire and increased its level in his spinal cord. In this case Anubis the hierarch will order vacations in heaven, which are the superior dimensions of nature, and the Divine Mother of the disincarnated will take him, give him strength and instructions so that in his next physical body this soul attempts the self-realization of his being. Even if the person has just lived his 108th existence, if he works on himself and increases his level of sacred fire in his spinal cord in relation to the previous existence, he could be entitled to a 109 existence. And this is the entire process that the soul goes through when the physical body dies. Now let's talk about the second death. The second death is the one that awaits the souls of people who exhaust their 108 existences without awakening their consciousness. When one doesn't work on oneself, the psyche or soul is lost at the end of 108 existences. This soul is taken to the abyss, it enters the 9 Dante's circles, from where it will not come out, until nature disintegrates each one of the defects that we were creating and feeding through successive existences. After thousands of years of suffering and decay, when the essence is completely cleansed, it is released from the abyss. This step is called the second death. Then that clean spark will start a new cycle in the wheel of samsara. That is the second death, and it is the way in which our essence manages to free itself from the ego, but without rescuing the wisdom and love that is rescued when we do the work of disintegrating our psychological defects voluntarily, in one of our 108 existences. Now let's talk about psychological death. It is the third type of death, and it is the most important one, since it is the one that will free us from the death of the physical body and from the second death. In addition, this death is what will allow us to free ourselves from the suffering, the misery and the constant slavery to which each of our psychological defects subject us. We have within us millions of psychological defects that lead us to make mistakes, hurt others, and ourselves, and that don't allow us to awaken our consciousness. Every time we let one of these negative ways of being manifest, it steals our energy, and that leads it to grow bigger, and gain more power, and control over us. For example, if for a long time we have allowed ourselves to have states of anger, impatience, fights, intolerance, and resentment, the defect of anger will grow to the point that it will have control over us for a longer time, and we will come to define ourselves as an angry person. The same with sadness. If we constantly let pessimistic thoughts, feelings of desolation, anguish, and bitterness manifest in us, that defect will grow until we become constantly depressed people. The same goes for all defects like drugs, lust, pornography, adultery, envy, criticism, greed, theft, violence, etc. The more energy a flaw has trapped, the more it can enslave us. Thus, psychological death frees us from the constant slavery in which the various selves or ways of being have us. We have millions of psychological defects that manifest in our daily lives and drain our energies permanently and unnecessarily. There are defects of all kinds, like anger, impatience, irritability, greed, ambition, worry, deceit, lies, fear, jealousy, lust, fornication, adultery, vanity, self-pity, suffering, pride, anxiety, antipathy, disgust, idleness, alcoholism, drug addiction, degeneration, masturbation, gluttony, envy, etc. As the Mantuan poet said, even if we had 1,000 tongues for speaking, and a steel palate, we would not manage to enumerate them all, entirely. Each of these psychological defects has trapped a small portion of our consciousness, which is what gives life to the defect. When a psychological defect dies, the trapped spark or consciousness, which is the real part of it, is released. But it is also important to know that if one psychological defect can be eliminated, all defects can be eliminated. If we can free one spark of darkness, we can free them all. If we free ourselves from all our psychological defects, we will have recovered all our consciousness and integrated our own being, achieving sacred individuality. That is why we say that the reason to live is to die. Let's now see what the practice of psychological death is, with which we are going to begin the process of liberation of our consciousness. Psychological death consists of 3 simple steps. The first is to discover a defect with self-observation. To do this, we must direct our attention, at all times, towards our inner world, to observe the defects that manifest in our minds as thoughts, projections, mechanical imagination, etc. The defects that are manifested in our emotion, and those that are manifested to us on a sexual level, and throughout our body. Immediately we observe a reaction in any of our internal centers, we must judge it, reflecting if that is a manifestation of our consciousness, or if it is from the ego. If, for example, in a given situation starts manifesting in us a defect of anger, or fear, or envy, or any other defect, we can only discover it if we are self-observing. We can observe what it is projecting in our mind, how it is moving our emotion, and the different tensions that it is generating to us throughout the body. With a simple reflection we can realize that this is a defect, that it is part of our ego, not of our consciousness. And once judged, we proceed to eliminate it, asking the power of love of our consciousness, which is our particular Divine Mother, to eliminate this negative way of being from our psyche. We can practice this technique at all times to become aware of all those negative ways of being that live within us and to release the sparks of our consciousness that are trapped and conditioned by these psychological defects. An example to illustrate the observation of the manifestation of various details of lust could be given if at some point, when you are walking down the street, you see someone who seems attractive to you. Immediately a lustful defect will arise. If you self-observe, you may discover an unmistakable feeling of excitement or tension in the sexual center. You might also observe a sudden feeling of attraction in your instinctive center. You can observe in the emotional center how you already feel in love, you may be feeling the characteristic butterflies in your stomach. You can also observe how you idealize that person in the intellectual center, imagining romantic or sexual scenes with that person, projecting scenarios where both are together, etc. And you could also observe the orders that the selves are giving you in the motor center, so that you come closer and start a conversation. You could observe the desire to move in a certain way, or to laugh out loud to attract the attention of that other person. That is self-observation. There you could observe how in a very common situation many details of the psychological defect of lust are manifested. And if you reflect that this is a psychological defect that manifests itself every time you see someone you are attracted to, and that this defect spends your energy clumsily, also that through this self, you are feeding other defects such as lasciviousness, promiscuity, and fornication. Then you will realize that all these are manifestations of a defect that has trapped an important part of your consciousness, and that has trapped the virtue of fidelity and chastity. Immediately it is understood that what is manifesting is a defect, we proceed to eliminate each observed detail. In this way we release our consciousness, since the idea is to remain in a state of self-observation throughout the day to discover the details of anger, impatience, anxiety, sadness, envy, jealousy, laziness, etc., etc., etc. And go asking the Divine Mother to eliminate them, because the greater the number of defects eliminated, the greater self-awareness. In addition, having these understandings will lead you to your own knowledge, it will lead you to know yourself deeply, and make radical changes in yourself. I invite you to try psychological death. Self-observation, discover the defect that is acting, judge it until you understand that it is a defect, and then beg the Divine Mother for its elimination to free yourself from all those psychological aggregates that maintain your consciousness asleep. Now, to finish this topic, let's see what dies and what doesn't die with the death of the physical body. What is it that die? Together with the physical body, the vital body and the personality are the parts that die at the end of an existence. What is it that does not die? Well, we must know that the essence or consciousness of each person is immortal. It is the only real and true thing of ours, it never dies, it is the part of God of each one. But also, the psychological elements in which our essence or consciousness is bottled, come back from existence to existence, and are strengthened in each one of them. And they do not die when the physical body dies, because they have an immortal essence trapped inside that gives them life. So, they will only die when in one of our 108 lifetimes as humans we decide to do the work of consciously removing them. But, if we don't willingly remove them, they will eventually disintegrate into the abyss when the second death is complete. If we do this work of removing all our psychological defects, releasing all our consciousness that is currently trapped in our ego by practicing psychological death, and we make this released energy go up our spine with the practice of suprasex that we learned in the previous topic, and we develop conscious love for all humanity by helping them awaken their consciousness, we will achieve the purpose of our existence, and death will no longer be able to reach us. We will become immortal beings with awakened consciousness, and we will be freed from physical death and from the second death, and we will ascend to superior worlds of consciousness. And this has been today's topic. I hope it has helped you to understand some aspects of death, to understand that death is not something to fear, since it is as natural as being born, and I hope that it has motivated you to want to investigate these things for yourselves. I invite you to the next conference, where we will be talking about conscious astral projection, or astral unfolding. We will see everything related to this very important practice, and we will see how we can achieve it. Until next time.